Those who prey on the innocent don't deserve a say.
Thank you for clicking on this video. I'm Brooke Makenna, but today we are going to be talking about the unsolved murders of Jackie McAllister and Brian Major. These were two individuals leading completely separate lives until a night in 1991 when they met the same tragic fate. Make sure to thumbs up this video if you want me to do more, and let's get on with the rest of the story. Now, Jackie, or Jacqueline in full, and her husband Gordon were on a road trip on a little vacation. She was 59, he was 62. They wanted to get away for a while, so they left their home in Lindsay, Ontario, and headed about 5.5 hours before they realized they really needed a break and it was getting dark out. So they decided to stop at the Blind River rest stop in Blind River, Ontario. Now, when they pulled up, they saw that it was a pretty small place. There was nobody else at this rest stop besides the two of them, so they very quickly and easily went to sleep. But at about 1 in the morning, they heard a knock on their RV door, and they heard a man outside saying that he was police and that they needed to move their RV. So a sleepy Jackie went and opened the door, of course, to a police officer who she thought just wanted to help them out. And that is when she saw the two guns pointed in her direction. Now, this man wasn't wearing a police uniform and also wasn't wearing a mask. He stood at about 5'10" and had long, stringy, blonde hair. And he started to say, "I'm going to rob you, and then I'm going to kill you." And you have to remember, Jackie was just waking up from dead sleep in the middle of the night. She was an older woman. She didn't really know what was happening, but she got her purse. She threw everything she could possibly get in there and handed it to him, hoping by some chance he would let her live. This man had a .22 caliber rifle and a .22 gauge shotgun in each of his hands. After Jackie handed him this purse, he shot her. Now, Gord at this time was obviously woken up where he was laying in bed, and he kind of came over where he saw Jackie on the floor, and then the intruder began to shoot at Gord. But fortunately, he actually jumped out of the RV window and rolled underneath the RV and got away from him. Gord was under the RV at this time, but the shooter did not come after him. In fact, he started to flee the scene, and that is when a man named Brian Major rolled up to the rest stop. And the shooter must have looked frantic or manic or something, because Brian actually got out of his car and asked if this man needed any help. But just like Jackie, he had not seen the guns until it was too late, and as he dove back into his car trying to get out of the line of fire, he was shot and killed as well. Gord smartly stayed under the RV until he saw the shooter run away past Brian and past the RV, and once he waited a few moments, he rolled out from underneath the RV back into the RV and began to drive onto the highway, because again, there was no other people at this rest stop besides this one civilian that had unfortunately come upon them at the wrong time, Brian. But other than that, there was still no one there, so he drove out onto the highway to find anyone he possibly could. He was wounded himself because he had been shot, but not fatally. It just kind of skimmed him. But he went out onto the highway and found a trucker that had called for help, and unfortunately at this time Jackie was in the RV and had already passed, and Brian had already passed in his car at the rest stop. So there was nothing they could do to save them. So then Gord was left to do the only thing that he could do for his wife, and that was to get justice and find this killer. And he did that very thing. He worked very hard with investigators. He gave them all the information they could possibly need. And the police were hoping that someone in this population of 3,300 people saw something. Gord also worked with a sketch artist to give as much detail as he possibly could to get his image distributed. And that's what they did. They actually sent the pictures out to the Ontario papers, and this led to a witness that called in. He said he had been hit by a blue van speeding out of that very area, that rest stop, that night, and it was actually hit by his car. But the van did not stop. Even though he hit this man's car, he kept going, and he was going right towards Sudbury. But it was so quick that he didn't get a description of the man, he didn't get a license plate number. That's really all he had, but that didn't stop the police. They actually went and investigated anyone that had a blue van in the area, and they actually went as far to look on both the Canada and the United States border since it was so close. So they went to both countries. But after 3,500 vans and people were investigated, they still didn't have a match. They didn't have anything. But Gord and the police still did not give up. Gord was looking through hundreds of mugshots, seeing if he could possibly identify the man, but even after hundreds, he never saw the man that he saw on that night. And this is when police decided that they needed more help with the public, from the public. So they decided to use the new computer technology that was coming about at the time, because remember, this was in the 1990s. And so they used the computer technology to really help the sketch artist and make it a better sketch, and they sent that new one out, but still nothing. This case was slowly moving towards being a cold case, and there was nothing that Gord could do about it. He was so frustrated, and he was even quoted saying, "I'll never forget his face. It wasn't a robbery gone bad. There was no resistance to this guy. He simply was going to kill somebody for no reason." Literally, that's where the case ends for the most part. There was no suspects ever really found. There was no justice for these two people that were brutally murdered, just minding their own business, just trying to be good people. Jackie was just trying to have a nice vacation, and Brian was just trying to be a good guy. Brian was a husband and a father to a young boy that he had left behind. But there is some hope that possibly the guy that did it was caught, but for different things. In 1995, a man named Ronald Glenn West was actually imprisoned for robbery, but the more they looked into his past, the darker he became. He had been committing a series of violent robberies, and all in the Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario area. And on June 16th of 1995, he entered a jewelry store, walked right up to the worker, as he had done many times before, acted like he was just someone there, a customer to buy things, and that's when he pointed the gun at her. He took her to the back, tied her up, grabbed all the money out of her purse, and this time he also took $30,000 in jewelry from this store. The whole time he would hold a black handgun to the victims, but he would never shoot them. And after he got what he wanted, he would leave them tied up and leave the store. He would never wear a mask, but he would always turn away from the cameras. He was a very smart individual until he got lazy or he got too cocky. One of the jewelry pieces that was stolen from this store was collected at a pawn shop in Sudbury, Ontario. Now this man went to the store with the stolen jewelry to pawn it off, get some money, but he didn't care about the cameras there, or he didn't think to look for them, because he was caught on camera pawning the very jewelry that he stole. Not only that, but he used his real name. His name was Ronald West. And he wasn't just an average guy either. He had actually been a Metro Toronto police officer until 1971. So after they had caught him on surveillance, the police staked out his house for 48 hours, even renting out the boathouse next door to watch him. And when he walked outside to talk on his phone, the police swarmed him. Nearly half a dozen officers. And when they went to look through his house, they found many more stolen items, as well as latex gloves and the ropes that were used to tie up the workers. He was arrested then and there and charged with multiple accounts of robbery and weapons offenses. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison. And while in there, another young couple actually purchased his house. And they were doing some huge renovations when they found something that would make Ronald West an even bigger offender. So they were in their basement redoing the ceilings when they pulled ceiling boards out and a plastic bag fell to the floor. It contained empty ring boxes, as well as an envelope that held 2 gun permits. And one of the gun permits was a .22 caliber rifle. Now, at first the police thought, okay, possibly they were used in the Blind River rest stop murders. But upon more investigation, they found that that gun was actually sold to somebody else in 1972, and the Blind River rest stop murders were of course done in 1991. So why would he have kept these papers if it wasn't because of that? What made them so important to him? Because not only did he just have it in a random folder that we all sometimes keep in our house when we don't want to get rid of things just because we're hoarders or we're lazy, it was stuffed in a ceiling in a plastic bag, like he didn't want anyone to ever find it, and he still wanted to keep it, so it signaled some sort of significance. And that's when the police thought of the .22 caliber killer that had never been caught. Now, the .22 caliber killer was a man that terrorized the suburban area surrounding Ontario back in 1970, which would have been before the gun was sold. In the .22 caliber killings, the first victim was a woman named Doreen Morby, and she was actually a stay-at-home mom with her 21-month-old son while her husband went to work. And on May 6th of 1970, she had a knock on the door, and there was no forced entry found. She had let this man in, and her fate ended with 7 shots from a .22 caliber gun, and she landed in a pool of her own blood with her 21-month-old son pinned underneath her. When the husband came home that evening, thank goodness the baby was okay, but the wife was already long gone. It was found that not only was she killed, but she was sexually assaulted, and they had semen from the scene, but DNA testing was not a thing yet. Fortunately, they did keep it. It is said to be 11 days later, but no one can really tell for certain how long it had been. But 11 days later, the next victim was found. A woman named Helen Ferguson, who lived 24 miles from the last murder, was actually home. She was a stay-at-home mom as well. Her husband was at work, and she had a sick child at home. A child named Dale, who was just an 8-year-old boy who was homesick. And he remembers his mother opening the door, letting someone in, and her saying that he had a sick kid in his car and she was going to help. He remembers them walking upstairs, and about an hour later, 3 bangs happened. Him being so naive thought it was just fireworks, but when he went out to check on his mom, he saw this man leaving their back door, wiping the doorknob off, of course for fingerprints, and walking out, and when he went and found his mother, she had passed. She was also shot with a .22 caliber, and she was also sexually assaulted. The shooter was never caught back then, and the police actually feared that there would be an attack every 11 days because possibly this was his thing. Maybe every 11 days it would happen. But 11 days came and went, and no other murders happened in this area. But he still was never caught. I mean, there were many suspects looked at, and this woman actually called in with a tip saying one of her residents had the same car, kind of looked the same as the sketches that they were putting out, and that it was possibly him because he had some sort of mental defects. He wasn't all there. They didn't have DNA testing at the time. They didn't have much evidence to say it was him, so even though most of the people thought it was him, they couldn't do anything about it, and they just had to let the case go cold. Oddly enough, the .22 caliber killing cases were opened a year after Ronald West was incarcerated for robbery, and the police thought this was the perfect opportunity to just make sure that Ronald didn't do it. But because they had very little circumstantial evidence that Ronald was the .22 caliber killer, it was just kind of instinct that they were going on, they couldn't get a warrant to get his DNA tested and get a sample of his DNA. But what they did was went to his wife's house. His wife, who I assume at this time was his ex-wife, actually had received a letter from him from jail, and he had licked the stamp of it. She wanted nothing to do with it or him, and very willingly gave it over to the police, who used that saliva from the stamp to get a DNA partial. And when they tested it against the DNA that was found at the .22 caliber crime scenes, it wasn't a full match because there wasn't very much DNA to test, but it had a lot of similarities, and that was enough to get a warrant to get a full DNA sample. And the DNA and his blood samples were a perfect match to those crime scenes. The police had taken this DNA and had it so well kept that they were able to find the .22 caliber killer. In 2001, Ronald pled guilty to being the .22 caliber killer. But this doesn't solve the murder of Jackie and Brian. What had he been doing between the killings back in 1970 and the robberies in 1995? Did he just go for that period without doing anything? Or was he a part of the 1991 murders? It is said now that while he's in jail, he is a suspect for the Blind River rest stop murders, but it's speculated that they have searched his house and his van and haven't found any evidence to prove it, and he's not going to confess. He didn't even want to confess to the .22 caliber killings. He really put up a fight until 2001 when he knew he was going to get charged with it anyway, but I doubt he would ever confess to something that he doesn't have to. But there are a lot of similarities in the rest stop murders and the .22 caliber murders. He liked to kill in pairs or in times of two. Not at the same time, not at the same place, but he liked to kill two at a time. Or maybe he didn't like to, maybe that's just what he did and what he got accustomed to, or maybe it was just an accident, but both of them had two victims. And in the .22 caliber killings, he didn't mind leaving behind witnesses. Of course the baby wasn't going to say anything, but he left behind an 8-year-old boy who he saw before he left and he didn't care. So it would make sense if he was okay with leaving behind Gord, who had seen his face. Yes, he killed Brian, but maybe he was just angered by the fact that he had asked him something or spoken to him, because he didn't even mess with Gord, who had just rolled under the RV, who could have very easily been killed too. And of course the biggest evidence is that both Doreen and Helen's murders and Jackie and Brian's were all done with a .22 caliber rifle, which could have been his gun of choice, his murder weapon of choice. And also there was an essence of charm to get into these victims' houses or places. We know from the .22 caliber killings that no forced entry was found. He was let in, almost like he had said he was a police officer, or he needed to ask him something, or he was an innocent man, and they let him in willingly. Just like in the RV, Jackie opened the door willingly, and he was a police officer. So it makes sense that he would have said to Jackie, to where Gord heard, that he was a police officer. Maybe he used that in the .22 caliber killings as well. Now everybody is innocent until proven guilty. He has already been proven guilty of other murders, other robberies, violent robberies, so we know he's not an innocent man, but is he guilty of these murders? The murder of Jackie and Brian. He lived actually 12 miles, only 12 miles from the Blind River rest stop murders at the time when they had happened. And his wife from that time actually confirmed that the sketches that were made looked similar to him, just if he was wearing a blonde wig. And if all of these were done by one man, because he started off at the .22 caliber killings with straight up murders, and then he went possibly to the Blind River rest stop and did murder and robbery. And then later on, he turned to just robbery. Now that could be a change in what he wants to do, a change in mindset, MO, or it could be his old age getting to him, and that's why he just turned to robbery when he didn't think he could get away with killing anymore. Now what I was wondering is, why wasn't Gord, Jackie's husband, who saw this man, shown a picture or given a lineup where Ronald West was in it so he could say if he was the man or not? There were articles found that Gord had passed away in 1998, a year before Ronald West was a suspect, and of course couldn't identify the man. But then it came out that Gord actually died in 2012. So why was he never given the opportunity? Or was he, and did he say that Ronald wasn't the man? And are police just not wanting to tell us that to keep the peace because people in that area, people that follow the case, kind of think it is closed even though we're not quite sure and don't have much evidence? I don't know. It's just strange to me. So there has really been nothing to connect Ronald that we know of to the Blind River rest stop murders, but he is behind bars for life, which makes you feel better in a way, but then again, the victims' families never got the justice they deserved, and Gord actually passed away not knowing what happened to his wife. But on a happier note, Gord did let himself get remarried before he passed, which makes me so happy that he was able to at least let himself live for his final years. So you guys let me know down below. Do you have any other information on these cases? Do you know anything else? Do you think that the same person committed both of these? So please thumbs up for more crime and subscribe so I don't feel like a crazy person talking to myself about these cases. And with all of my cases, I really like to make it about the victims and not the killers. And 3 women did lose their lives and 1 man, and they didn't deserve that. They didn't deserve to have such a tragic, awful ending. And if anything, please just remember them, keep them in your hearts, and let's hope to God that we caught this guy. Remember to request any cases down below you want me to cover. I'll let you guys go. Bye.
They deserve to pay.